Well, Lorraine, thank you for joining us on the Rising Beyond podcast.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Sybil.
Yeah, I'm right. It's so fascinating to me how we can connect with people that are across the world and still we are passionate and working towards some of the same goals. I think that's one of my favorite things about podcasting. So, can you share a little bit about yourself, your story, kind of why you do what you do?
Well, if I go back to where it started, basically my then partner it was during the COVID in the lockdown, right? He had been with me here in Spain. This was our retirement home, and we each had properties in the UK. And my property was rented, and he was still using his business. And so he would often go backwards and forwards between Spain and the UK. But in 2020, there was lockdown and COVID, so there was no flights. He couldn't leave. And he was already planning that he would bring furniture out. Well, that got cancelled. And there was no flights till July. So we spent that time together. And I thought that, at last he's going to be spending more time in Spain and we're going to have a nice time together. The relationship, it was coming into a commitment. So anyway, he'd gone back in July and packed a van with the things from the house and made a list of everything and showed me the photographs of the van in a text message. And he came back in August, and 2 days after he came back, he terminated the relationship. And I was in total shock at the way the relationship was terminated. I now call it his 4-sentence discard speech, because it was like an emotionally mature way to end a relationship. The 4 sentences were, "I've got something to tell you. I'm in love with another woman. We can remain friends if you want to remain friends. We just can't have sex anymore." And when he said that, I was in a space where my intuition had already warned me after the first sentence. And then it was like my intuition was saying, don't react, don't have any emotional front of him. And I walked away and I went into another room. And then when I got into the other room was when I could feel the anger rise in my body. And that was at the point where I had my fist and hit into the door frame in the bathroom because I just couldn't hold that. I just needed to get the anger out. And that's not normally me. Came back out. And we sat for a long time, hours, talking about different things. I was saying he was repeating mistakes of his past because I knew what his past was. And at that point, while I was still in this shock, an idea came into my head. And as soon as it popped into my head, it came out in words. And it was, I'm going to write the story. I'm going to write a book. And that was August 2020. Now, when I said that, I had no idea what was going to be ahead, obviously. 2 days after he did that, he then writes his financial proposal. He wants to make sure I'm secure in retirement. He's selling this house, he's selling his other house, he's moving on really quickly. This letter, he sends in an email to me, even though he's here with me in Spain. Instead of talking it through, he writes it in a letter. So I've got figures. And he's offering the chance that I can have a house outright, because once the house was sold, he was going to pay 50% of the value. And some of that money I could pay off the house I had in the UK, which would give me a steady stream of income. There was other things in the letter that didn't really make sense, because he was saying that if I wanted to leave straight away, he would pay rent somewhere, yeah? But that didn't have any amount attached to it, so it wasn't like how much he would pay per month, how long he would pay that for, 3 months, 6 months, a year. There was no substance to the letter, really. And I thought, well, why would I want to move out? I'm already living in this house. And some of the term was he would only pay some of the money after I leave. And so it was really confusing. So anyway, that was how the relationship ended. But the abuse basically started more or less straight away. I think what happened was, I believe I must have caused an unintentional ego injury, and he could see that he was losing control over me. And I didn't know anything about emotional abuse, psychological abuse, verbal abuse. I didn't know anything at all at that point.
Yeah.
Plus, I'd never heard about narcissistic behaviours or traits. So it was just a few days later when I was in the bedroom and an agent that had been instructed had called him to give some feedback. And the feedback that she gave him was that I had said something negative to her clients.
Mm.
And this negative thing that I said was something about a question that I answered from one of her clients. And it was, do you hear the motorway? Because there's a motorway directly in line with this property. It's not that far from the house. And I just answered truthfully, yes, I sometimes hear the lorries go down the motorway at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that was construed as negative feedback. So as he comes into the bedroom and then I'm being threatened, he's in my face, he's shouting at me and swearing at me. I'm in control. You do as I say. I can throw you out onto the streets. So, and I'm like shrinking down. So that was the first thing that happened. So cutting a long story short, within a couple of weeks, I've already looked at hundreds of properties. And then I decide to write my alternative proposal to him to say, you've offered us 50% of the place. I'm needing some sort of income. I want to pay off that mortgage. And I'd already asked him about making that payment before he would leave, because he wasn't going to leave until the end of September. And he'd said no. And I thought, well, he's offering us this thing, but he's now saying I can't have the money to pay the mortgage off. So it was really a difficult situation, because it's like one side was this, and then within days it's that, backwards and forwards between two things. So that's really confusing to start with.
Yeah.
And we had this meeting arranged, and before this meeting, there was something that basically made him angry again, because in my proposal, I was looking at how could I raise the funds in order to buy out the 50% that he held of the property, even though my name wasn't on the deeds of the house. He'd offered the money. I just thought, well, look, if I can pay him what he wants, then I will be able to stay here, create a business. I had a retreat type of business, yeah. And in that meeting that we had, he wouldn't allow me to speak. He shut down my side of the conversation straight away, and the meeting just basically went into a one-sided verbal onslaught where he was wanting to tell me what he wanted, what he needed, and I had to just listen. And then when the anger came on and the humiliation and the threats and everything in this meeting, even though it was recorded, I was again in a position of shrinking down and not wanting to say anything. Yeah. So he then left for the UK, and things were unfolding really quickly. By October, my friends were saying, you need legal advice, you've got to go and get some legal advice. And I was in a panic, didn't know what to do. But there was more abuse coming towards me through text messages, through emails. And some of the things were twisted. So one of his emails even said he'd never loved me, basically. And I was, it was really difficult. But it took from that situation after he'd left, there was a couple of more incidents. And one of them that sticks into my mind was that he was writing now through and copying in our lawyer and saying that I would leave with nothing. He could go to court, he could evict me, and I would get nothing. So it had gone from half of the house, 115,000, to basically nothing.
The threats that might hold some credibility. We don't even know. But when you're in that state of complete confusion, really hurt, right? You don't have solid ground underneath you. Those threats are really powerful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. You feel intimidated and you're just uncertain. I was in fear. Well, I was in grief. You're losing your relationship. You're losing everything that you had for your future, all your plans, everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just been completely shattered. And so you're in a bad space to start with. But then on top of that, I didn't have any business. I didn't have any income, and I have a very limited amount of savings. And so I was in a difficult position, and I didn't realize how vulnerable I was at that point, because I had obviously trusted him. Yeah.
Yep.
So it took me a while to get over that. But I think the justice system made it worse. The advice that I actually received made it worse. I
Mm-hmm.
had in mind that even though through that recorded meeting that we had, he had shouted, "You can't negotiate with me. You can't negotiate a gift." He termed this settlement as a gift. And so I took this recording and the emails to a solicitor who could understand English, because obviously I'm in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And this lawyer then said, "You need to file a gender violence complaint." And that threw me, or I was like, what?
Yeah. Yep.
And I even asked that solicitor, "Can't you just write to his solicitor, to the other solicitor?" He just repeated and he went, "Did you not hear what he said? You can't negotiate with him. You need to file a gender violence complaint." And I wasn't in a strong position at that point. I wasn't confident to say to that lawyer, "I'm asking you, I want to negotiate. That's what I want to
Mm-hmm.
do." And I wasn't strong enough to say that. I just took that advice. I paid him the money and walked out. So it made things escalate from there. And then it was months before I even felt any better in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Recovering from all of this grief and trauma and everything and learning. I actually went onto YouTube and educated myself, and I found lots of videos. So I like watched lots of videos about all the abusive behaviors and what can happen. And then that obviously on top of what had happened, and I realized I was in a fake relationship from the very start.
Yep. Yeah. And that's even when that attorney or solicitor said, "Hey, you basically said, you are in an abusive relationship. This is an abusive relationship." That first punch to your gut.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you start looking back and having reflections on the whole relationship, that can be that, in my experience working with survivors, that is a really horrible feeling time when you've learned, oh my gosh, this entire relationship, the person I thought was my person was not even a real person. There's nothing real about it.
So that following year, there wasn't any evictions happening anywhere in Spain. He was going to take this litigation, have us thrown out on the streets, but there wasn't anything happening. And I started to write the book, Post-Separation Abuse, Betrayal and Abandonment, What Type of Man? And I self-published it the following year in 2022. In 2022 was basically in the January of 2022. He was fed up of waiting for his lawyer that he'd instructed the year before for the court to send the documents. So in January of 2022, I get an email out of the blue, "Happy New Year, Lorraine." And as if nothing's happened. And I'm like, oh. So I don't reply. I get some advice. And then I respond. He's wanting somebody to come and view the property. And I just respond normally, say, "Okay, I'll accommodate the viewing if you honour your first proposal, your first agreement." And I got straight away, that was a red rag to a bull type of thing.
Yes.
And he turned from nice to nasty again. And the next email was, "Did you not see these court documents?" And then he says, this is in another email, here's the court documents. So it took till June of 2022 to actually have the eviction hearing. And my book was published in May. And in July, I realised the first sale of the book was somebody who got through an Apple iPad. And in my mind and my intuition, I just went, he's bought the book.
Yeah.
That was the first sale. It was him.
Right.
He'd bought the book, right? And I was thinking, oh, but I published it in a pen name, Loraine Marshall, and all of the names in the book were changed. So I was protecting myself and I was protecting the people who my story focused around, because I told about my story from how my relationship was in the beginning, how it changed when I moved to Spain, and then what happened in the post-separation part and the litigations where he was wanting to throw me out on the streets. Obviously, I'd been threatened twice about it, but then he was taking a civil route. So that's all in the book. So obviously the legal advice that I had and the lawyers were also written into the book to tell the story. And the last part of it talks about the healing, different modalities and different things you can do to get over trauma bond and moving forward and what you can do. So it's in 3 parts, my story, a bit about the law, because obviously with me, I've been on the deeds of the house, not being married. The law is a grey area. And this is where a lot of couples can get caught out, because there's not that many countries that actually implemented to protect couples in cohabiting, living together relationships. It's what Europe calls de facto. So I wrote about that in the book to warn other people, raising awareness of the situations that can happen. So it was months later that the Guardia Civil turned up at the gate here. It was October of 2022. I was already in a massive panic because I didn't know when the eviction would take place.
Yeah.
Because the hearing's gone through, my lawyer was like, the judge will order your eviction. Full stop. Definitely didn't put any evidence in. I didn't even have a voice to speak. They didn't ask any questions. They made him fly from the UK to come to Spain for a 5-minute hearing where no questions was asked, and I wasn't allowed a voice to speak, and my evidence didn't even get into the court.
I think a lot of women and men who are survivors, they experience that, where they prepare so much and then nothing. They get no chance.
You see, I had a free public appointed lawyer. He had a lawyer who knows about precarious eviction, someone who's a specialist, right?
Yes.
That could throw a lot of money at in order to move things quickly. Thing is, it didn't really move quickly. So in October, here's the police at the gate with a list of an appointment to go to the court, and I was totally in a panic. And I have to go to the court. And when I went to the court, I find out that my partner has now filed 7 criminal allegations against me through the same lawyer, the same Barcelona lawyer, who I've already been in this civil court with. And I read through the allegations. It's revealing secrets. It's insults. It's misappropriation. It's theft. It's slander. It's harassment. It's damages. 7 allegations. But this lawyer wasn't basically easy on me. I think it was legal intimidation as well. Heavy-handed tactics.
Yes. Yep.
It was in bold, in capitals. And then at the side, because he'd requested maximum penalties under the law. And all the articles of law were written down. And then the prison sentence at the side. And it added up cumulatively to 17 years. 17 years. And I'm like...
This is for leaving, right? For not doing what he wants you to do and for writing a book.
Writing a book, yeah. The slander, harassment, plus 30 pages of screenshots of my social media profiles. 30 pages of screenshots to allege the slander, the defamation and everything, yeah? Couldn't believe it. I was like, he's been stalking my social media. He was blocked on everything. Yeah. So I was again thrown backwards, because this is what happens. You just get to a place where you're feeling, right, I can face things now. I can face the world. I'll be able to do this. And then it's like they've got chains wrapped around you, and they just pull the chains and you go whoosh back.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. And I had to wait from October of 2022 all the way through to September 2023 before the first court hearing. I was lucky in some respects. I had my property, I sold the property, and I'd received the money in 2022, so I could pay to have a criminal lawyer.
Yeah.
I couldn't trust the free public appointed lawyers. Normally, they don't speak English and they don't really care. Yeah.
You're
So
just
the
a
first
number.
lawyer was the gender violence lawyer. The second lawyer was the civil court eviction lawyer. So the third lawyer, they appointed somebody free. I looked at the qualifications, and he had a doctorate in civil law. And I was thinking, hold on a minute. So I asked the question to this free lawyer, how many cases have you had where you had defending someone against 17 years in prison? And he didn't answer. So I
You're like, no, thank you. No, thank you. I'll pass.
I sacked that lawyer and went ahead with a lawyer in Madrid, criminal lawyer, and luckily went forward into the first hearing. I wasn't meant to answer any questions about the book that I'd written, but I got into this hearing and the judge is asking us questions, because the judge asked questions first. And after 2 or 3 questions, he said, "Did you write a book?" And I'm sitting there and I just said, yes.
I sure did.
And I just, because I wasn't comfortable to say, I don't want to answer that question. Plus, in the 30 pages, he'd screenshotted the fact that the book was published. So what's the point of saying you don't want to answer the question when I know I've wrote a book? And I thought, well, I'm not going to say I haven't written a book, or I'm not going to say I don't want to answer that question. So I did answer, and I just said, yes, I did. So that was the first hearing. He asked about, did I publish any photograph in the book? And I'd said, no, I didn't, because it wasn't a photograph, it was a sketch. It was a sketch that he'd obviously posted publicly, and a friend had screenshot the photograph to send to me. So I turned that into a sketch. Well, if you realise, in court cases, normally, journalists, when they report on cases, can't take photographs in the court. So what they do is they sketch
They have
the
sketch artists. Yeah.
perpetrator in the dock, or, edge a sketch. So I did put a sketch in the book, and it was him with his former ex-girlfriend when he proposed to her, and there were the two of them were on the beach, and he posted that on Facebook, and she had the ring on her finger going like this, I'm engaged. So that's the sketch that I put into the book. So I told the judge, yes, I did. Well, I didn't put a photograph, it was a sketch. Anyway, he asked a few more questions. I said a few more things. And at one point, he asked, did you make a recording? And I said, yes, I made a recording. And I said, it just came straight out of my mouth, part of the recording that I'd made in 2018, which was 2 years before any of the other abuse had happened. But it was very relevant because he had said something like, I've made you dependent on me. It's my fault. I've made you dependent on me. That was part of what he said in a very angry tone, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I realised, obviously, after he'd left, when I found that recording again, I understood how women get entrapped in relationships, because I was an independent businesswoman in the UK running a property management business and had my own income. But once I'd been moved to Spain, I had to sell that business in the UK and then look at how I could make another business here. And every attempt to make my own business and have my own income was criticised,
Yeah.
devalued. And I honestly didn't see any of them red flags, not until I've actually understood the whole
Yeah.
process, the cycle that goes round.
Yep.
I didn't understand any of it. And that's how
Yeah.
I
And
understood
even
it.
the isolation, right, of moving to Spain, even right, if he painted the picture of how amazing it was going to be, it does not feel coercive at all. It's like, yes, I subscribe to that. That sounds like an amazing dream in retirement.
Yeah.
But there's likely that other, right, there was such a different motivation to separate you from everything you knew, your income. You wouldn't have access to see his other life that he was clearly living. And so you were stuck somewhere else.
Yep, exactly how it was. Especially as I was like weeks at a time on my own. And I was building networks here and friends and community and doing everything like that. And then he would come out for a few weeks and then he would go again. But the litigation that I had against me, when it was heard in September, by December of 2023, the court had dismissed 5 of the allegations straight off because I had evidence that could prove that the slander was dropped because the prosecution wouldn't accept the evidence, which was a video on YouTube. They wouldn't accept the evidence. So the slander, harassment, misappropriation, theft, the others, 5 of the allegations were gone. Revealed secrets was gone. So there's only 2 left in the court, right, by December.
Yeah.
And that was damages and insults left in the court. And the damages was because I'd had a fire in the garden which got out of control. But lots of people here have little fires. It's a massive, massive land here. With trees and things. And so people in the countryside usually burn their weeds.
Burn their trash or weeds, yeah.
And it just got out of control. So that was damages. And the other one was partly, it was insults. And I can't remember how much prison that involved. I think it was like 18 months or something. And damages was 3 years. So I still had some prison sentence hanging over my head. It took till October of 2024 for the litigations to be completely dismissed. But a funny thing happened because in September of 2024, I do a lot of research online. I'm writing another book as well. And so I was researching and this slap litigation thing came up through my search. And I thought, well, what's that about? And I know that there's been another couple of cases that had happened in the UK where women had spoken out on social media. One had spoken out on X or Twitter. Another one had spoken out via Facebook and talked about the abuse that they'd suffered. But there was no prosecution of the person. And so when the person had found out, just defamed me and they take the litigation. See? So I'd already seen 2 other people in the UK who had gone through all of this, where the perpetrator abuser that they had said, this is what's happened to me, had taken them to court. And both of those women had to go through 18 months, 2 years of litigation. And both of them had their cases ruled against the perpetrator, like they won the case. But the thing is, you're not winning, really. The point is that you've been through all of that emotional distress, financial costs and litigation, and it's really, really stressful situation. And if there's no counterclaims, you don't get anything in return. There's nothing that comes back.
Yeah.
And I had asked for a counterclaim to the lawyer that was representing that I was paying for. I had asked to make a counterclaim. He said, we need to dismiss these cases first. I was like, what? And I thought, well, that can't be true. That can't be right. Because I know that people put counterclaims in legal situations. I just let it go because I still wasn't strong enough to argue. I found this article on slap litigations and it was a downloadable PDF from the EU case report on slap litigations between 2022 and 2023. And I thought, hold on a minute. Defamation, it's all about defamation. So I read through all of this report, and I found one case that was seized in Spanish court. And I was like, how many other people might have a defamation case in the Spanish courts, right? These
Mm-hmm.
people have looked at all these cases and put this into this report. And it said the claimant had a business registered in the UK. And I went, hold on a minute. There can't be that many people with businesses registered in the UK that's got a defamation case in Spain, right?
Right.
And it must be him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found that there was only one individual that had a case against them. But all the rest of the cases for the defendants were NGOs, like charities,
Mm-hmm.
journalists, politicians, or people who were whistleblowers.
Yeah.
So I just knew that my case of defamation in Spain was actually being anonymously reported in this report.
Mm-hmm. How, right? Like, what? Like, how crazy to hear that. And the other piece is like, which I have a question for you for our audience, but there's that piece of people don't believe, right? Like, no, you're divorced or you're separated, like, just move on. They're moving on. That people with really highly narcissistic traits or antisocial personality traits, they don't just move on because the goal is to continue harming. That is the goal in this arena. But to be one of the only people that is like a air quotes like normal person, you're a normal person to have this suit and the consequences could have been really dire. My question is, so I know a lot of the survivors that I work with, they do, after they're kind of further on in their healing, they want to speak out. They want to write books, they want to have podcasts, they want to have coaching businesses or be a part of legislative advocacy or all of these arenas. And what can they do to protect themselves? Should they start sharing their story? What are kind of your top tips that they can use to help protect themselves?
Well, got a book that I've read. It's called How Many More Women? And there was two female barristers, Jennifer Robinson and Kenya Shader. And in this book, they talk about how when there's been abuse, even if it's with or even without prosecution, you are free to come out as a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Because under the human rights laws and European laws, there is recognition that it comes under, I think it's the free speech, public participation. And because I found the SLAP litigation report and I've read that as well, there are now laws going into place which is called anti-SLAP laws, which basically means that if you consider that you being truthful in things that you've said, truth is always like the defense against defamation. If it's true, it's not defamation.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if you are a survivor, you can come out as a survivor. The only way that you might have difficulty is if there's been something in family court, which the family court have said, that's the
Yeah, I'm
one.
like smiling, like this horrible smile, because I'm like, yes, because we have gag orders put in place.
Gag
And
orders.
so,
And now, just a couple of days ago, I don't know if you know Dr. Charlotte Proudman. She's a barrister in the UK. She's been
mhm,
through a lot of things herself with litigation over her head. But she is now taking a case of a woman who wants to ask through the High Court that she can tell her story, because obviously she's been through family court and's been gagged. But Charlotte Proudman has taken that forward for her to see if they can maybe get a change. If they can win that, then they can actually get a change in the law about
yeah,
being gagged. Because
right.
the whole
Oh, they
point of
feel
the
so
book,
unconstitutional to me, at
yep,
least, here in the US. I'm like, how is
the
this
whole point of this
constitutional?
this book about how many more women was like the injustice that happens, because it's not just in intimate partner
Right.
relationships. It's because women can be sexually assaulted or even
Hmm.
raped in workplace, right? In
Right.
the workplace. And so there has been a number of cases where women have been in jobs, employed, where they've been with clients or they've been with colleagues where they've had things happen. And what happens is the HR sweeps it under the carpet.
Oh, yes, very often.
Because what
yeah.
they'll do is they'll get rid of the person who's made the complaint rather than the person who's committed the offence.
Yep. Yeah.
And if the woman doesn't go straight to the police and they go to HR, then they'll try to, but he makes a lot of money for XYZ company, or this client is very special, he's very wealthy, blah, blah. And so they get the employee to sign the non-disclosure agreement.
Non-disclosure, yep.
Yeah, the NDAs. And so that's why when they wrote this book, they give different cases that you could go and look at through the human rights, where people have took their cases to higher courts to say that you are allowed to speak out. And the NDAs have been broken in the past when the same company and the same person reoffends and reoffends and reoffends, right?
Yeah.
And that the women become aware, women who have signed these non-disclosures, they then become aware because it gets into the public and then they all come forward. Yeah.
Yeah, together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking that it would be important to, I deal mostly with the family court system, and we focus on documentation, and having evidence and things of that. Even if you don't get to present it, is that you have it as a just in case, and to help if you still get unsure and doubt yourself about what's happened. It helps with that gaslighting, getting rid of that as well. I am thinking for defamation, if truth is the most important thing. So if it is true, it is not defamation, that having evidence of what is true is probably really important.
Yes, it is very wise to document. And I kept text messages, I kept the audios, I kept photographs, emails from his lawyer, from my lawyer, and from him. So I had records, even text messages, because even on the day that he had come into the bedroom and started to threaten me with "I'm in control" speech, I wrote within seconds I've just been threatened, and I text to a neighbour and I messaged back to the estate agent. I was highly annoyed because I thought she was a friend, and it turned out not to be quite friendly.
Right.
Anything where there's money involved, I think people lose their mind.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I kept a record of everything. And that's the point, document. And there is software available that you can actually use, some for free and some that you have to pay for. But it's a good idea to be able to keep it, because obviously things can get destroyed, you can lose your phone or something can happen. So if it's in the cloud, it's there.
Well, and I'm thinking your executive function while after having a trauma experience goes out the window too. And so even knowing where you've tracked things or put things is really difficult. So what do you do in your life now to help other women?
Right now, I'm actually in the process of gaining a certificate for coaching, because I've never been a coach in my life. I mean, all I've done is I've run my own property management business. I have been in charitable trust fundraising before that. And I used to work for Government Office North East when I was an employed person in European funding, to be funny, So at the minute, I'm looking at how I can move into coaching. I do write my blog and I write articles on Medium. I try to talk about the different forms of abuse, things that happened. I try to put my experience into it so people can see that it's not always physical, although there was times when there was some physical things and I didn't understand at that point that what had happened was coercion and there was other elements to my relationship. In fact, before I came onto this, I was thinking this relationship that I've had, because I've had 3 long-term relationships, and it was the best relationship, but also the worst relationship
Mhm.
that I've ever had.
Mhm.
And that is very hard to work through.
Right, and to wrap your mind around.
Yeah, because
Well,
relationship is always like a love bombing
yes.
situation.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, where can people learn more? Where can people read your blog? What is the best way to connect with you? And especially if you are in Europe, sometimes it's really hard to connect with those of us in the States that do the work. And so I think it's really nice to be able to share resources because we do have a pretty big listenership in Europe. Resources where you're at. So, how can people reach you?
Well, I write a blog, and my website is lifechangeplans.com. And the articles I write there are shared into medium.com. And just recently, I have set up a crowdfunding on DonorBox because I'm looking to establish a nonprofit here as part of a bigger plan that I have,
Mm-hmm.
because I need to have a nonprofit here which is going to help the women who go through a similar situation, because the judicial system here in Spain obviously doesn't recognize, even though it is a criminal offense, they don't really recognize emotional and psychological abuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of places, a lot of countries don't recognize it. And it's like, if you
Yeah.
haven't been threatened with your life, you haven't been emotionally and psychologically abused. But I'm thinking that doesn't work through, not with the type of abuse that women can go through. You
Mm-hmm.
don't need to be threatened with your life. It's,
Right. It
the
it
litigation abuse
causes
is bad enough.
it causes so much harm, that psychological abuse. And because we didn't actually mention it, where can they get your book?
It's available on all the digital stores. It's available on Amazon through US, Spain, and UK. I relaunched in October of 2024, actually relaunched it before the defamation case was dismissed. Because at that point, after I found the case in the slap report, I was like, right, that's it. And I
Yeah.
relaunched the
Yeah.
book in October of 2024. And a week later, all of the case was dismissed. So, yeah,
So that's available.
it's
And
available
if
there.
if you were multitasking, not to worry about it. It's all going to be in our show notes. Lorraine, thank you for joining us from beautiful Spain. You're in the evening hours. I'm in the morning hours here, but I really appreciate you being with us.
Okay. Thank you, Sybil.
And thank you all for listening. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast.